Welcome. I'm going to ask my fellow attendees or my fellow presenters to join me on screen. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lindsay Baker, Executive Director of Maryland Humanities, and at the top of this, I have some housekeeping items for us to take care of first. We want to let you know that this event is being recorded for further viewing purposes. You will be able to view this event on the Maryland Humanities YouTube channel after the author tour is complete. If you have a question for Ross Gay, use the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Please do not use the chat to ask questions, although we do encourage you to use it to chat. With the Q&A function, you are able to view the questions that other attendees have asked. If you want to ask a question someone else has already put in the Q&A, click the thumbs up under it to upvote that question. This will let the moderator know which questions are of the most interest to the audience during Q&A later in the program. We're very thankful to have an ASL interpreter, Kara, with us today, and captions are enabled. You should see the captions at the bottom of the screen. If you find them distracting, click the button that says CC and you can turn them off. All right, let's get started. We're excited you all could join us this evening. This event is one of more than 300 programs being held this fall as part of our One Maryland, One Book program, which we like to think of as Maryland's biggest book club. Since the beginning of One Maryland, One Book 14 years ago, the authors of our selected books have spoken at various locations across the state. This was not possible this year given the ongoing pandemic and our wish to err on the side of caution by not holding large indoor events at this time. We are proud to be able to bring the One Maryland, One Book author tour to you virtually so we can all still gather to hear Ross Gay speak. The level of enthusiasm for his collection of lyrical essays, The Book of Delights, highlights our collective interest in coming together during challenging times with the hope of connecting through our own experiences and the experiences of others. High school classes, book clubs, public libraries, senior centers, correctional facilities, and more have been participating in events inspired by the book across Maryland since September and plan to join us for more discussions and events this month and into November. At Maryland Humanities, we're passionate about making the humanities a part of everyday life. Programs like this one use the humanities to explore our ideas, our stories, and our values, to foster understanding among people with diverse perspectives, and to strengthen our ability to interact meaningfully. I invite you to take a moment to learn more about our 9 other programs by visiting mdhumanities.org. And if you enjoy your time with us this evening, I hope that you will consider clicking on the donate button at the top of our website homepage when you visit. You see that part got a really big smile on my face. I'm the executive director of an educational nonprofit, and we are only made possible by people like you and your generosity, and you all allow us to thrive and continue to offer over 1,000 free programs statewide annually. Now I want to take a brief moment to thank our co-hosts and partners, Anne Arundel County Public Library and the Anne Arundel County Public Library Foundation. Thank you. Additional support was provided by Banneker-Douglass Museum, Greedy Reads, Prince George's County Memorial Library System. The staff of Anne Arundel County Public Library and their partners have put great effort into this evening's event. Special thanks to Michelle McConville, who worked closely with our staff and is continuing to work closely behind the scenes tonight. Thank you, Michelle. And now I would like to introduce our moderators, Sabriyah Hassan, Director of Programs at Banneker-Douglass Museum, and Chanel Compton, Executive Director of Banneker-Douglass Museum. As a native New Yorker, Sabriyah fell in love with urban education and cultural programming as a child. Inspired by her teachers and her mother, she became a special education teacher. Since leaving the classroom, her interests have remained in educational leadership and resulted in the creation of Team Triumph, a Baltimore City-based youth development organization recognized by the Baltimore City Mayor's Office, among others. Currently, Sabriyah is spearheading a project with the Banneker-Douglass Museum and Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture to create meaningful experiences for the public that combat systematic racism. Chanel Compton is inspired and passionate about her role as Executive Director of the Banneker-Douglass Museum and Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. She previously served as the Executive Director of the Prince George's African American Museum, as well as the Education Director for the Creative Alliance in Baltimore. And perhaps most importantly for me, but not Chanel, she happens to be a Maryland Humanities board member and a longtime colleague. So I love seeing her here. I'll turn things over to Sabriyah and Chanel to introduce our wonderful author.
Thank you, Lindsay. Greetings, everyone. So an introduction of Ross Gay. Ross Gay is the author of The Book of Delights, a genre-defined book of essays and 4 books of poetry, including his most recent, Beholding, a love song to legendary basketball player Julius Erving, better known as Dr. J, who dominated courts in the 1970s and 80s as a small forward for the Philadelphia 76ers. Gay is a founding editor with Carissa Chin and Patrick Rosal of the online sports magazine Some Call It Ballin', a founding board member of the Bloomington Community Orchard, a nonprofit Free Fruit for All Food Justice and Joy Project. Gay has received fellowships from Cave Canem, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation. He teaches at Indiana University. In the Book of Delights, Gay offers a volume of lyric essays written over a tumultuous year. It was an election year. The first nonfiction book from the award-winning poet is a record of the small joys we often overlook in our busy lives. Among Gay's funny, poetic, philosophical delights, a friend's unabashed use of air quotes, cradling a tomato seedling aboard an airplane, the silent nod of acknowledgement between the only 2 Black people in a room. But Gay never dismisses the complexities, even the terrors of living in America as a Black man, or the ecological and psychic violence of our consumer culture, or the loss of those he loves. More than anything other subject though, Gay celebrates the beauty of the natural world. His garden, the flowers peeking out of the sidewalk, the hypnotic movements of a praying mantis.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you all. Again, this is event number 3, and it's going good. It's having so much fun with you all. And so, yeah, I'm really glad to read again. And it's kind of fun because I have these, this book of Delights, it's 102 essays for those of you who haven't read it. And I'm trying not to read the same one over in these, whatever, I guess we'll do about 9 events or something over the next couple days. And it's fun because there are some essays that I just automatically just skip. I just forget to read sometimes. And I think maybe I'll get to them over the course of these next few days. What I want you to know, if you haven't read the book, I wrote this book from August 1st, 2016 to August 1st, 2017. I was just, one day I was actually at like an artist retreat in Italy. And I was walking, you know, they were putting us up in a castle. It was actually in a castle. And so they were cooking for us. The food was good. It was beautiful. And I was walking back from town, right, you know, down the hill, and had my little espresso and was coming back up to the castle where I was going to have a delicious vegan lunch prepared for me, lovingly, abundantly. And I was walking by and there were sunflowers on one field and beautiful cut hay on the other field. And there were wildflowers and everything was just amazing, beautiful. And I thought, oh, I should write a little essay about this feeling of delight, because it registered as a feeling of delight. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I should quickly, like that, I thought, I should write an essay every day for a year about something that delights me. And that's how this book came to pass. I gave myself 3 constraints. Maybe we'll talk about this later. I gave myself three constraints or rules. I wanted to write them every day. I always wrote them by hand, and I wrote them quickly. So the first draft was always done in 30 minutes. So that's enough for now. And I think I will start to read a little bit. It's nice to start with one that's a little bit maybe playful is the word. I'm going to read this one. It's called Blowing It Off. So like I said, I had the rule of writing them every day. I didn't write them every day because that's not who I am. I got pretty close, but I didn't write them every day. Blowing it off. When I began this gathering of essays, which, yes, comes from the French word essay, meaning to try or to attempt, I planned on writing one of these things, these attempts, every day for a year. When I decided this, I was walking back to my lodging in a castle, Delight, from 2 very strong espressos at a cafe in Umbertide, Delight, having just accidentally pilfered a handful of loquats from what I thought was a public tree, but upon just a touch more scrutiny was obviously not, Delight, and sucking on the ripe little fruit, turning the smooth gems of their seeds around in my mouth as wild fennel fronds wisped in the breeze on the roadside, a field of sunflowers stretched to the horizon, casting their seedy grins to the sun above, the honeybees in the linden trees thick enough for me not only to hear, but to feel in my body, the sun like a guiding hand on my back saying, everything is possible, everything. My mother, who has not always been keen on praise, has these days, for some reason, been praising my discipline. Maybe it's because I have a kettlebell practice, or I never eat bacon. But since she said it, and she's my mom, I tend to think it must be true. The first essay, or try, or attempt, that I skipped was on day 4. Believe me, I had good reason for blowing it off. I can't remember it now, but it was convincing at the time. Probably I got tired and thought, oh, I'll just write 2 tomorrow. Except when tomorrow actually came around, I was daunted at the prospect of trying 2 in the same day. 1 try is hard enough. What if both attempts were awful? I'm dramatizing what was probably the minutest chatter in the Siberia of my mind. So deep, I doubt I even heard it. Or instead, perhaps I quickly revised my position to regard the occasional lack of discipline. Let me call it failure. No, let me call it blowing it off into a delight. Rather than putting Ross on the rack and whipping him with a cat of 9 tails, what is that? And pouring alcohol all over the wounds, antiseptic? And then flicking matches at him and telling him to dance, you lazy, worthless goat turd. Are you asking how can one be on the rack and dance at once? Me too. I decide, despite all the disciplinarians breaststroking the slick and gooey folds of my noggin, double fisting sickles, swinging at anything that looks too glad, to just blow it off. An apropos ancillary delight, the word whatevs. I was probably absent 5 times in 13 years of primary school, despite having had 2 surgeries and pretty serious asthma, breaking a few bones, and not infrequently falling hard on my face. I had a paper route for most of those 13 years and literally, not like the kids say literally, I mean literally, never skipped a day. Even after the night when I was about an hour away with a new lover, curled into a ball, fingering each other after gallivanting barefoot in a thunderstorm. And I would have rather died than miss basketball practice, the first part of which I did in fact miss 2 days before the playoff game against Upper Merion, where I had to be prepared because they also had a big old bruiser in the post, and we won by 7, but still. I woke in a panic and got there fast as I could, on the verge of tears, apologizing profusely to Coach Simon. And about a week before my old man was diagnosed with liver cancer, I was hanging around the house when he was getting ready to head out to his job at Applebee's. I said, oh man, blow it off. Let's go watch Hellboy. He looked at me wistfully while tucking in his shirt and sliding his belt through the loops. You have no idea how bad I wish I could. That was the first time he'd said anything like that. I was 29. And so, in honor and love, I delight in blowing it off. This one is called Remission Still. Remission Still. I just got the sweetest textual message from my friend Walt. It read, "I love you, breadfruit. I don't know the significance of this particular fruit, though I have recently learned that it is related to the mulberry, which is unequivocally among the most noble and delicious of fruits." A few years back, my friend Walt became intensely agoraphobic. He was afraid he'd be walking down the tree-lined streets near his house on Spring Garden Street, and a bus would hop the curb and take him out. Or a limb rotted from the inside might drop on him from one of those trees, or lightning, or the earth itself might throw open its ravenous mouth. It happens, and gobble him up. Perhaps it's no surprise that precisely 7 years prior to the onset of this acute terror, Walt was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, which at the time offered a 7-year survival rate, which actually means you have 7 years to live. 7 years until you're dead. I remember the day Walt was diagnosed. We were going to meet at Thai Lake in Chinatown for a late night dinner. And he left a message on the answering machine that he'd had blood work at his checkup, and his doctor sent him immediately to Hahnemann Hospital, where they made me wear a mask and booties to see him while they sucked his blood out of one arm, whirled it around in a machine, and put it back in the other arm in a stopgap measure called leukapheresis. He felt okay, but his white blood cells were a mess. His folks were there, looking nervous in their masks and gowns on a couch across the room. Walt's already high-pitched laugh was a few notes higher and a bit thinner as he watched what was happening to his blood. When the treatment was done, he gave me his blessings to go indulge at Thai Lake, to eat the Peking pork chops on his behalf, which I did, with the ung choy, most likely. It was by now about 1 a.m., and in that very full and loud and smoky restaurant, I ate one of the loneliest meals of my life. I went with Walt to get a second opinion from my uncle, an oncologist who palpated Walt's newly extra lovable tummy and ran blood work, which returned the same results. So the survival rate is 7 years, Uncle Roy said. It must have been something like my father, whom Walt adored, telling him he'd be dead in 7 years. And maybe it was something like me saying it. There I go, putting myself in the middle of everything. I guess I could just ask Walt. Without getting too deep into the unabashed turmoil of interferon, someone should not do a Marina Abramovichian performance by injecting this toxic drug, experiencing flu-like symptoms, etc., which was so severe, so awful, that after a 2-week break from the poison keeping him alive, which the doctors call a vacation, beware anything called a vacation that isn't actually a vacation. Walt, at the thought of going back on the stuff, walked his ass into the psych ward, lest he put a hole in his head. Walt needed to feel bad like he needed a hole in his head. Walt needed to feel better. And so when a drug called Gleevec was introduced about 5 years into Walt's illness, it occasioned a kind of remission for a lot of people, Walt included. It seems to work so well that it cures about half of the people. Walt might be one of them. Despite that remission, when 7 years had passed and pre-Gleevec, he was supposed to be dead, he got real scared he was going to die, which he did not. This one is called Ghost, after the movie Ghost. Today, after I came back soaked and stinky from the sweet basement gym in my mother's apartment complex, I kicked off my shoes, snagged one of my mom's ubiquitous bottles of store-brand seltzer, and plopped down on the leather couch, not taking a shower. This strikes me as a version of self-infantilization, which the holidays are all about. We were struggling to figure out how to play a movie on demand or on demand on her television, which has so many channels. Freedom isn't free and all. Usually by this time in the visit, I have developed a nervous tic from the television being on quite loud and constantly. And I have nurtured my self-infantilization by enduring and resenting the television rather than asking for a different volume, or none at all, which my mom would have gladly accommodated, and does when I ask, which maybe is why I'm writing this at 1 a.m. instead of sleeping, cherishing this bit of waking silence. We were bumbling through the endless scroll of movies, trying to find Milk, which I hadn't seen and my mother thought was wonderful and was willing and interested to watch again. She has a thing for Sean Penn, but anytime she brings up Mystic River, she will actually tear up and start lamenting what happened to Tim Robbins' character, I think. But I'm not sure because I fell asleep in the first 10 minutes. She asks me why it had to happen, literally, and it ruins our time together. It will drop a pallor over us as she looks sadly at me like I've done something terrible. Then she looks out the window, shaking her head, the sky suddenly gray and very far away, and I haven't even seen the goddamn movie. So if she starts going there, I will try to distract her the way you slip a wooden spoon into a toddler's hand when he's freaking out about having to put down the cleaver. Anyhow, she noticed Ghost was about to start on TBS. Oh, Dad loved this movie, she said, somewhat to my surprise. Now, my dad likes stupid movies, but usually with car chases and explosions. And he didn't go in for, as far as I know, the supernatural. Real conversation I had with my father at age 7 or so. What happens when you die, Dad? The worms eat you. Now go play. An aside, I am, as perhaps you are, time to time, alerted to my likeness to a given public figure, an actor or a professional athlete, the details of which comparison I will mostly spare you, though I will tell you President Obama, with my hair short, early on, was one of them, by white women only. But the one who is relevant here, if you'd call him a public figure, which I wouldn't, given as he played the part of Patrick Swayze's murderer, and so was granted 5 to 10 seconds in the film, the movie, though it was evidently enough screen time for 2 women at the Jersey City DMV, after I paid to get the boot off my car, to whisper to each other, giggling, before asking me if I was a movie star. Same for the juice lady at the health food store in Lambertville. Are you a movie actor? All of them referring to Swayze's murderer in Ghost, my doppelganger, evidently, which maybe, in retrospect, had some kind of negative effect on me and my dad's relationship. I would come home from work and he'd be watching Ghost and the tears would be just running down his face. The way my mother said it, the construction of her saying, I'm saying, makes it feel as though that's what my father was always doing at 6:15 on weekdays when my mother got home from work, which, given as he was always working himself, was not the case. Though in some way, the construction, the figure my mother has created, makes it the case. Sobbing as Magical Whoopi donates her body to, channels dead Patrick Swayze for his and Demi's supernatural reunion. Sobbing to the Everly brothers, the Righteous Brothers, Sobbing as sparkling, shimmery, ghostly Patrick Swayze goes back to heaven or wherever for the last time. You might discern in me a certain disdain for the movie Ghost, which is correct and completely irrelevant, given as the subject of this essay is my father weeping at a corny movie. Is my father weeping for all time? By virtue, by gift of a colloquialism, a precise grammatical imprecision on my mother's part, on language's part, which too is the subject. His beautiful brown skin gleaming beneath his glasses as he turns around, looking over his shoulder from his leather chair, wiping his eyes and smiling at us as we come through the door. Let me do this one too. This is called Love Me in a Special Way. And this is a DeBarge song, for those of you who do not know this. Love Me in a Special Way. I wish there was like a pause button that I could just pause time and have you all go. For those of you who don't know that song, some of you I know it though. The song begins with a few chords, a few trilly flourishes as a prelude to Elle's singing. You know you had me with your sensuous charm, yeah, you looked so alarmed as I walked on by. At this point, if you're me or if you're like me, which is most likely a generational designation, but also perhaps and imprecisely a racial one, I'm saying my dad's de facto Philadelphia station was Power 99 and WDAS, a not too shabby backup. You are writhing. If you are standing, your knees may in fact have buckled, which is a fine metaphor for being moved and one I have likely overused, but I'm talking about your knees buckling and your hand or hands going to the ground to keep you above it. Or if you're sitting, you might strike something, perhaps your own body, if you don't even draw all of your limbs toward your heart, which makes plain that the heart itself, an overused metaphor, is not always metaphoric. It perhaps has to do with the song's place in my history, and more particularly my psychosexual history, by which I mean when crave became an inarticulate state of being, my tongue somehow almost always out, and nose thrown into the breeze, rubbing myself, helplessly against every couch and mossy tree in my path, that this song was a sort of red carpet, and so can almost feel like the origin of the craving, or at very least can occasion the near precise character of the craving, which was youthful and wild and utterly overwhelming, and therefore a little odd to feel sitting in this basement cafe in Indiana, full of people, I'm gonna take a wild guess, have no similar feeling about this particular DeBarge tune. I could be wrong, I know. The feeling arrives when it does almost as much a recollection as a feeling, or perhaps more accurately, a recollection that imparts the feelings it recollects, which occasions in me an actual bodily and hopefully pretty quiet response. An animal response, not unlike the one I overheard a friend make when she caught sight of some hunky, mostly naked guy doing calisthenics in Boston Common. A subtle growl like a muffler with a hole in it. An animal in between pleasure and hunger. Hunger itself sometimes a kind of pleasure. This song actually makes me make that sound sometimes. No kidding. And Elle, too, let me not neglect to acknowledge his beautiful androgynous crooning, the plea, which is such an upsetting of dumb conventional narratives of heterosexual pursuit, also doing their work in my not quite pubescent mind, because Elle is the one begging. Oh, it's a declarative sentence, but you better believe he's begging and playing hard to get it once. How do you do that? To be loved and loved specially. But not only that, despite someone very recently poo-pooing the DeBarges as a bunch of light brights when I mentioned how much the group meant to me when I was a kid, it thrilled, no, delighted me when I was recently standing in the security line at the Philadelphia airport and an older gentleman working there said to no one in particular, and just loud enough for me to hear, this is an as yet uncoined rhetorical maneuver, though within the larger umbrella of signifying or talking shit. Hey, is that guy over there a DeBarge? Okay, and I'm gonna read like one more.
So all I am is singing in my head, I like it, I like it, I really, really like it.
That's it.
That's it. That was perfect. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Gay. That was amazing. And I actually listened to the book on Audible, and to sit here and hear you read it, it's the same feeling. So it's like so authentic, but it's so much cooler because I'm here with you about to ask you some, questions about it. So that's great. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here. And I will jump right into the conversation. And then of course, afterwards, there'll be some time for question and answers from the audience. And again, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sabriyah Hassan. I'm the Director of Programs at the Banneker-Douglass Museum. So I will start, and I'll start with this. So I'll say, while reading your book, I was fascinated by how, although this book was written some time ago, many of the topics currently resonated with me. So this was pre-pandemic, pre-George Floyd, pre-Breonna Taylor. But when I think back to the Hole in the Head chapter specifically, and think back to you saying, not verbatim, but that idea of not letting white people in white coats experiment when you're children. So as a mom of an elementary and high school age student, that stopped me in my tracks. And then of course, given, the current climate and culture of society, again, that resonated with me. And I don't know if any of you know, but today, Henrietta Lacks, who is a Maryland native, her family has filed a lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company who, they claim have exploited her and her immortal cells. So again, all of that resonated with me when I heard that. So I want to ask you now, being that this was written some time ago, how do you feel about that same idea of, who we let, experiment on us, or just that topic in general? Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is really interesting, what you said, that the book, it kind of, I don't know if I was aware of this as I was writing the book, like that the sort of, I mean, I probably wasn't thinking of it, but it has sort of borne out that the subjects or the topics of the book remain, relevant, and the variety of things. So if I'm thinking about race, or if I'm thinking about white supremacy, or the brutality of the medical system, or the ways that we care for each other, the ways that we survive, and the ways that we are generous with one another. These are all things that, it doesn't seem like they will stop being relevant, what I mean? And it's sort of like there is this thing, which was that, the book was written between August 1st, 2016 and August 1st, 2017. Which was, like a tumultuous time, but it's also the case that, it's been a tumultuous time. Like, it didn't start in August 1st, 2016 being tumultuous, and it's like, I mean, and like, so like some people, it was like, whoa, this is something. But a lot of people were like, yeah, it's been something. It's been something. Welcome. So yeah, that's how I'll respond to that. That's a great question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, you're right. And that's so funny that you say that. It's like, welcome to the party. And it's for some people, it's been an eye opener, but for a lot of us, this is life. Like this is life. And this is how we navigate through life. So thank you for that. I'll hand the mic over to Director Compton. I believe she has some questions.
So I want to take the second half of that question, because me and Sabriyah had talked earlier, and it was supposed to be a two-part question. But the second half of the question is, you talk a lot about, given that this was written in 2019, and now that we're in 2021 and we're in this new resurgence of civil rights and the Black Lives Matter movement, in and the public lynching of George Floyd created this whole ripple effect of awakening, right? Primarily to white America. Do you, and reading the book, you talk a lot about taking up space, like with your own body. You talk a lot, you stated that you write a lot in cafes, and even in writing cafes, like you feel almost like you're on the edge of being kicked out for being in a Black body. And then there was one interesting chapter about this guy who I imagined to be a white guy. I don't know if he was a white guy, but he was like sleeping on the sidewalk. And I was like, what? So in taking up space, like, do you, in reading the book, in writing the book in 2019 and reliving those moments in these discussions, do you, in 2021, does that delight in taking up space, and also the fear of taking up space, does it have any meaning for you? Are you unpacking that in different ways? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And I love too that it's a complicated question, the way that, and it's not an easy question. And so one thing is that the book was published in 2019, but it was written in like 16, 17. So it's even a little bit further back than that. But one of the things at that moment in my life, and it was sort of like that I learned prior to that too, was that this thing of taking up space in any kind of way is, like one of the things I feel like in certain ways, not all the time, but one of the things that like, we might be taught as Black people is to like, be careful of how you take up space.
Yeah.
It could end badly, And I think of my dear father who was born in 1945 and, had a whole kind of, his whole thing, like we had a very complicated relationship over many things, but one of the things, the older I get, I realize like, oh, he was trying to keep me alive. He was trying to keep me alive. So sometimes when he was like, probably like, don't take up space in that way, as someone who's 47 now, like I can understand, oh, okay, I see. But at the time it was, irritating and just like, oppressive. and meanwhile, he's trying to like look out for me. But one of the things that I feel like this book does, and there's a couple essays in there where I sort of address it kind of head on, is that there's another kind of taking up space that feels as sort of, maybe as dangerous, but certainly as radical, which is that to be Black and to be expressing adamantly what you love, what delights you, that what as much what constitutes your life is what flummoxes you with joy as much as what is your heartbreak, which again, that's sort of like there's a certain way that a certain policing of our expression of that, I think. And if you're I know I've felt that among all kinds of people, if you're meditating on or seriously contemplating things like joy or delight, you're like a lightweight, like you're not paying attention. Meanwhile, all of our families forever have been like, you must meditate on what you love. You must. You meditate on what you love and you pass it on. Like that's what you're doing. You're not meditating on what is horrible and passing it on. You're meditating on what you love. Like we will tell you what is horrible, or we will like try to keep you away from what is horrible, it away from you. But what we're trying to do is like study what we love and share that as much as possible. And I feel like that's another one of the taking up space things that the book is trying to do. And it's trying to be like, both my physical body takes up space, in a certain kind of imagination, but there's this other idea of like the way that I'm gonna celebrate. I'm gonna celebrate and that's gonna take up some space too,
I love that. It's like when passing down or passing on what you love. Like there was a part, and I'm probably gonna mess it up, so you can fix it for me for sure, because you wrote it. You said if you just loving stuff creates delight or creates joy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then this practice of like passing down, it's like you're passing down these rituals that have been loved for generations and generations. And I think about like Sabriyah, who is Muslim American, and she's also Gullah. Am I saying that right, Sabriyah? And so she talks a lot about like, you know, like she just speaks with such pride and candor about her own culture and her own practices, which is just so beautiful to me, you know. So yeah, and I think about also just us working in an African American museum and having this going to work every day. What am I trying to say? Like going to work every day and preserving those rituals, to be presented in authentic ways and sometimes new ways is really, really exciting. And that is an act of love. Yeah. You know, in preserving those delights.
That's it. That's it.
So this was a really, I think I probably read a few lines to my partner, like just, you know, because it was just so poetic. He was like, what the hell are you reading? You know, because it was like, there was one part in the book where you were talking about how, and we talk about this a lot, this like connection, these roots, and you use the tree, like we are all connected. And for me, reading this in 2021, I really needed that because, you know, everybody I'm sure in this room have had like really difficult conversations, courageous conversations that were difficult and taxing. And I had to kind of remind myself like, okay, just love, you know, find that connection because it is through our pain that we are connected. If I said, I don't know what if you wanted to.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. Like, and it's through our pain, but the way that we hold each other through our pain. Right. You know, the way that we carry each other through our pain, or maybe even the way that we carry each other through the fact that what we know is that we will all die. You know, we will all change form, and that form may constitute, depending on how you think about it, a kind of loss, you know. And so we will probably, depending on, you know, if we're not like enlightened, we will probably suffer. And to me, joy is actually the ways, the practices, the luminosity of the practices by which we care and tend for each other in the midst of the profound sorrow, which is just like also part of our lives, you know. And I feel like that like the work of a museum can elevate that, can kind of be like, you know, this is evidence. These are the artifacts of some of the ways that we were held together and carried through, you know, which to me then is like, that is like song, you know, that is like dance, that is like all of the traditions, you know, the traditions of survival and the traditions of like carrying forth each other is celebratory, you know, even if it's also mourning, you know, celebration is always mourning, you know, and it doesn't mean one or the other is predominant, although one or the other probably time to time rises to the surface or whatever. It means that they're mutual, they exist together, you know. That's how I
love that. I love it. It was it was the trees that if one tree is lacking, then they would provide nutrients and resources to a tree maybe far away. And that is that they uplift and they hold each other. And we saw that, especially in 2021, how we just cared for one another. People that I didn't think would care as much about anti-racism work really did show up and surprise me in a lot of great ways. And so thank you for writing this timeless book with timeless messages. I'm going to pass the mic over to Sabriyah.
Yes.
Because I've been hogging it.
So that was beautiful. Director Compton, you're so deep and you get me every time. I wanted to kind of lighten the conversation a little before we jump into the question and answer, but I wanted to talk about that oh so famous head nod, right?
Mhm.
And when we talk about joy, right, and delight, and someone, so we work in Annapolis, Maryland, and we are a Black museum in Annapolis, and sometimes the Black faces are far and few between, and we talk about it. That's why prior to reading the chapter, I laughed because we talk about it all the time, where we'll go down to Main Street because, there are great things there and it's a great place. But when you see another Black face and that, often nonverbal, Director Compton and I was talking and I said, for me, it's the head nod. It's the, she said for her, it's the stare, it's the gaze into the eyes. But I can tell you, like, the joy, and this for me, I've spoken about this in other forums as well. I can be traveling overseas, I can be in Europe, I could be in Puerto Rico, but to see that, it's like, yeah, I'm here, we're here together, I'm with you, and nothing has to be said. Nothing has to be said, but the joy that I know and delight that I get from that, when I saw you write about it, and like I said, we talk about it often, I just think it's something that, we should talk about. And if you wanted to offer more on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I agree. And it's sort of I also live in a place where, and part of the kind of the joke, or the thing of the way that the essay starts is because there's a Black dude walking down the street and he's like, not, and I'm trying to like acknowledge him, but he's like, he's not acknowledging me. I'm like, what's wrong with you, man? And, but yeah, that thing of like, again, it's another sort of, I think it's an example actually of what we were just talking about before, like in a way to me, what the head nod or the other sort of I see yous or witness scenes, in a certain kind of way, like my jokey self is like, it's a way of being like, when it goes down, I'm gonna come grab you, but it's also a way of saying like, in the midst of the brutality, I see you, in the midst of the brutality that we're in the midst of, I see you, like, etc. I know you have not been seen. I know we are not seen, but I see you, And so it's also in a way, when I think of it, it's a kind of also carrying through the sorrow, it's a version of carrying each other through the sorrow, and it's so funny because it's just a little thing, happens all kinds of different ways. There was this dude in town the other day. I actually just wrote a little delight about it, but I didn't know who he was. I think he was probably just passing through or something, and but he had a sort of physical gesture, but we had this kind of thing, and I did how I it's like how I do it, and then but he did this whole other body thing, but it was like, there we are, just like that. We knew each other, just a little bit, just enough to be like, I see you,
Yeah, that's the connection. I know every time that's the connection. That's why I laughed when you said how hard you tried to get the man to acknowledge you. And I was like, what's the matter with him? What's going on? That's great. I love it. Well, so what we're going to do right now, Director Compton and I are, of course, going to stay here, and we're going to move on to the question and answer session from our audience. So I'll be reading the questions. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the question and answer at the bottom. I believe it shows up at the bottom of your screen. So I will start, and this is from Rebecca Morris. And it says, so many of your essays are about physical contact or sharing an experience with strangers in public, a pat on the arm or a knowing nod. Reading them in 2021, I was struck by how pre-pandemic some of them felt. Have you continued to think about delights in 2020/2021? How have your delights changed in the age of social distancing? That's great.
Yeah, great question. And I noticed that too, like when I was reading them, like after kind of lockdown and stuff, last March or whatever, when I started reading them again on Zoom, first of all, I did notice immediately, like, oh, I'm like a touch person. Like I'm a person who is very acutely aware of sort of proximity. Like I'm someone who likes to be in a room with a lot of people. I feel like that, it's energizing to me, and a lot of the delights, they kind of reflect that. So I guess one way of talking about it is that it's interesting, and also, of course, it's sad to sort of think of, okay, so that thing has sort of changed, but I am writing another. So it's 5 years since I started that book. August 1st was 5 years. So I've decided to do another one. So I'm writing a new delights, book of delights, book 2, I'm calling it. But it's interesting, because I used to be on airplanes all the time, and I'm not. I used to do certain things that I don't do as much. I'm just not in crowds in the same way. And so we'll see. I mean, there's definitely no shortage of delight. There's still no shortage of delight, and there's still no shortage of love, and no shortage of the sort of, maybe the things that were happening for me 5 years ago that I was sort of finding delight in. They're probably changing a little bit, in part because I'm changing, but also, the context and is different. What's going on is different. But anyway, that's a long way, a sort of wandering way of saying that I don't quite know, like I can't quite map it out yet, but I know that, like, a lot of the delights happen on an airplane. A lot of the delights happen in a cafe. A lot of the delights happen in a certain particular kind of social context. That's a little different. That's a little different now. So we'll see, August 1st of 2022, I'll let you know. I will have it all mapped out. That's a great question, though.
That was great. Thank you so much for that question. And I guess the next question kind of leads into that, or, piggybacks off of that just a little. And this is from Anne Marie Maloney. And she asks, what does your revision process look like? Are your essays in its raw original form, or do you go back and tweak each one?
Yeah.
Now we want the secrets.
So, like I said at the beginning, that I draft them, I just write them in 30 minutes. Like, so I give them, and that's like, for those of you who maybe, if you are writers or you teach or anything like that, I like to do timed exercises because it sort of makes it impossible to be a master. You just automatically get, so you're a little bit off balance, if I only have 30, because I write kind of slow, and I'm very, like, kind of meticulous on the sentence level and everything. But the 30 minutes thing is like, okay, I got to figure out why it is, or something about how it is, why it is, etc. I like high fives in public or something, and I have 30 minutes, go. It makes for a certain kind of thinking and a certain kind of looseness and a certain kind of play, actually. Like it gets more playful. That being said, doing it quickly also means that I'm sort of following trains of thought. I'm sort of, my syntax is a little different in a way that I sort of discover and is beautiful. But there's also, what I would consider a kind of sloppiness, because I'm going really quick, and I just got to get there. So that's sort of a long way of saying that once I get it out and let it sit for a little bit, and I'm in the process of doing this now, I go back in and I revise a lot. And I'm basically trying to figure out how to use what I have, the 30-minute draft. Sometimes they're pretty close, but sometimes they need, they always need something. They always need something. Sometimes they're pretty close, but a lot of times I just don't quite know how to make a sentence work in the way that I'm trying to make a sentence work. So the revision process could be that. The revision process could be that I'm touching to a difficult idea or saying it in a way that I know how to say now, October, whatever, 4th of 2021, but that I know, or I will soon realize, oh, I didn't say that right. I got to learn how to think about that better. And so, I might have someone else read the essay and kind of give ideas or something like that. So the last thing is that I love revising. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I have this book that'll be out in 2022, and I'm not sure what it's called yet, but it's all these essays about sort of around joy. They're essays around joy, and they're longer essays. And you can tell they're kind of related to the delights, but they're something else. And they are, I carry them with me, every second of every day. Like, I mean, I'm telling you, like when I close that computer, boom, I'm going to pick it up and start trying to make these sentences better, So it's something I love to do. And partly it's because I think I like to get my thinking clearer. And in a way, revision is trying to get your thinking clearer, it's just trying to get your thinking clear. So yeah, that's how I'll answer that. It's a good question.
Do you find, I'm going a little off script as I'm listening to you, do you find that constantly writing about joy and delight makes you more happy?
I think in a sort of complicated way, for sure. I mean, like just the practice, I think in the introduction, I say it's like a discipline to do it every day. And then I say it's like a practice. And I think of the practice in terms of kind of a spiritual practice of like, just do something every day, like note something that you love every single day. You can imagine that is the kind of thing that will change you over time. It'll just make you have a muscle where before maybe you didn't. It's very easy. If you watch or listen to the news, God forbid, it's very easy to like note a horrible thing or horrible things every single day. But we don't spend a lot of time being like noting things that are wonderful or delightful or that we love. Sadly, it's like sometimes it's surprising or difficult for people if you were to say, what are you loving today? Sometimes it's hard for people. And I'll do this with students. I'll be like, what do you love? And they'll often want to say, I like this or I like that. And I'm, nah, what do you love? Because I think that really is, I think it's probably the most important question that we have, like, what do you love? But so anyway, that practice of noting what it is that you love, what it is that brings you joy, what it is, that brings you into joy, what it is that delights you. I think that is, I think it will make, my experience is that it made me way more attuned to the daily experience of delight, way more capable of sort of recognizing when I'm in the midst of delight, but also cataloging those things. Like today I saw I don't know if you ever seen them, they're kind of like bobbleheads, but they're not quite like a little plant statue that goes like a little plastic thing that goes like that. And it was in a windowsill. And because I wrote a delight about the bobblehead, I saw that walking down here and I was like, I love those things. But now I know that I love them. So walking by, I had the experience of being like, I love those things. And to walk around being like, that's the thing I love. It doesn't at all mean that you're not like, and that's a heartbreak. It doesn't at all mean that goes away. It just means that you kind of fill up this other reservoir of like, yeah, and I love that thing, I love that thing too. And I love that thing. And I love that thing, Yeah.
That's so good. That is so good.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure, please.
I wanted to read a question from Ennis Smith, and I'm kind of going out of order, but Ennis is such a lovely person, so I'm going to read her question. One of the many things I love about your essay is the connection to the natural world that you highlight, bring to life for your readers, and particularly how you delight in the natural commons, like a tree in a park or your neighbor's yard. Do you have advice about how to still and notice those ecological delights more often? But add to that, it seems like, do you find, because you write a lot about nature and your garden and our clear inherent connection to nature, do you think that that is a requirement for finding like true inner delight, like that connection to nature? So I don't know if that's a tag along to your question, Enes, but
I think it's great. I think they're both great. Yeah. In terms of, it's interesting. I've been trying to, I garden, so I'm sort of deeply involved in thinking all the time about, seeds and the magic of a garden and how the earth gives us every single thing. So that's just part of my practice because I'm lucky enough to be able to tool around in a garden, and I like it. I'm interested in it. But I do feel like, to Chanel, like the second part of the question, I feel like, well, the first part of the question, I feel like one of the things that I feel is crucial, and it is a kind of a gratitude practice, like to really be like, the fact of the matter is that the tree makes our lives possible. Mm-hmm. The tree makes our lives possible, the tree makes the life of the birds and all the critters. And, we could, if we got close enough to the tree, we would be like, oh, that's that one tree that I walk by every day and forget to acknowledge. That one tree is housing, 10 million things, making 10 million things possible, me one of them. That practice, of course, it's probably like, you wouldn't get very far, which maybe is a good thing. Like you get like, you're like, oh, to be like acknowledging all of the what we call the natural, things that we are indebted to fundamentally, they go, we go, we can go inside of our bodies, the microbiome, like all of the critters that make us what we are, that outnumber what we think of ourselves as being. Without them, we go, like if we get exposed to a certain kind of radiation, there will be like stuff in our gut that keeps us alive that will die, and we will die. We will die. These are creatures that we forget to be grateful to, the natural world that we are, the earth that we are. And I feel like a kind of what I think of as like a sort of deep gratitude practice, the way I think of it often requires, or it almost automatically goes to the earth, as a way not only of being like, the earth makes me, us possible, but the earth that I am an expression of the earth, I am here, by the grace of the earth, I am possible by the grace of the earth. That's sort of how I feel about it, and I feel like that acknowledgement, that sort of steady acknowledgement, makes our eyes or our ears or whatever it is, however we interact with the land or etc., it makes it like sharper or clearer or more profound. It makes it make very much sense to walk by the trees and say thank you. It just makes it make a lot of sense. And it makes it make a lot of sense to be like, oh, that bird who I previously had not had a whole lot of relationship to also appears to love the shade of the tree, or whatever. It's sort of, to me, it's like, it reminds us of the truth. There's all this stuff out here that like is not the truth, that tries to alienate us from our fundamental entanglement with each other, and each other being the earth. But the trees, the wind, the rain is trying constantly, it seems to me, to be like, to remind us, we are here for and with you, like, and so part of our practice, my practice, trying all the time, is to be like, thank you.
The practice of gratitude.
Yeah.
The attitude of gratitude.
Yeah.
So I'll read one last question. And I really actually love this question. It's from Lynn McDermott. And Lynn said, I listened to your book in the audio form and thoroughly enjoyed it as I drove south, as if I was listening to a conversation with you in my car. That's how I felt too. It is so important to stop and find the delights, especially in this past year of challenges. Was there ever a time when you couldn't find a delight? Or are there always silver linings for you?
I don't think there are always silver linings. I don't think that's how I think about it. But I think part of my practice is to be like, in the midst of what feels devastating or what is devastating, to still be able to acknowledge, for instance, that the sun came up, or to still be able to acknowledge, in the event that there's enough rain for the plants to grow, that there's enough rain for the plants to grow. That's so which is to say that it's not a silver lining. It's that all the things exist at the same time. It's not, and I think in the delights, there are moments where you can kind of tell. When it's interesting to me about that book is that the book sometimes is getting pulled toward, it's like acknowledging, sometimes it's like my rage is so adamant, and complete, and that it requires, again, the practice to be like, okay, that's a real thing and that's a legit thing. And also, do not forget that DeBarge is on the radio this moment. Like, do not let that slip by. Like, you get to listen to DeBarge right now, and just think about that for a second. Fill out the whole thing. That's not a silver lining. It's that many things exist at once. Many things are true at once. And that to me is sort of like, that's just being a creature. That's just being a creature.
That's excellent. Okay, one last question. The people want to know what your shirt says.
Oh, it says Midwest against capitalism.
There you go. Thank you so much, Ross. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm thoroughly thankful, and so many takeaways for me just being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love it. This was a great conversation. I feel honored to have been able to listen in this evening, and I hope our panelists had fun taking part in that. Thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone who made this event possible, including our sponsors. And thanks again to our co-hosts, Anne Arundel County Public Library, our local partners, our moderators, Sabriyah Hassan, and Chanel Compton, and of course, Mr. Ross Gay. Be sure to pick up a copy of the Book of Delight's essays at your local bookstore or library. And I suggest Greedy Reads if you're buying tonight, since I know they partnered with us. And if you could take a few moments to complete our survey to offer feedback, that would be great. You'll see a link for the survey in a chat. Thank you.